Well, joining me now to discuss this and other aspects of Egypt is Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, who represents Nebraska's 1st District. He is a member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations and is the founder and co-chair of the Egypt Caucus. And he also just authored a piece that was in the Hill.com yesterday entitled Egypt, Our Forgotten Friend. Congressman Fortenberry, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Tony, thanks for having me on the program. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Appreciate your perspective and what you do as well.
Well, thank you. And, you and I have spoken a number of times about Egypt. You actually spent some time there growing up in Egypt, and you've gone back and spent time there with the current president and other officials there. There's reason for promise with Egypt, but they still have some challenges ahead of them.
Well, I think that's a fair characterization. One of the dynamics in Washington is that we tend to be very, very hard on friends. And this is why I authored that piece on Egypt called The Forgotten Friend. And thank you for mentioning it, by the way. And it's on my website if anybody wants to go deeper into the issue. The reality is, for instance, there has been a 40-year-old peace treaty between Israel and Egypt that was gained through great sacrifice by the leaders of both of those countries. In fact, the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, gave his life. Right. He was assassinated because of this peace treaty.
By the Muslim Brotherhood.
By the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt and Israel had fought 4 wars since 1948, the last one being 1973. And in fact, when I was a young man, I entered the Sinai Desert in that space where the 73 war was fought, and I saw the hand-painted sign that said, "Here was the war, here is the peace." And it was one of the early formative moments for me as a young person that I think instilled in me the ideals of possibility that are gained through sacrificial leadership. And so I tend to see Egypt in this lens. It's not to in any way diminish the problems that they have, the human rights issues, the nature of governance, and the protection of religious minorities. However, Egypt could have completely collapsed just a few short years ago after there were uprisings in the street. We had the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood President Morsi, and then the destabilization that took place. You think we have problems now in the Middle East? It's unimaginable what would have happened if Egypt, the largest Arab country in the Middle East, would have collapsed in the chaos. Unimaginable. So you have a military person take power who now has since been duly elected, named President Sisi. In one of his very first acts, he brought the Coptic Christian Pope, Pope Tewodros, and the Grand Imam from Al-Aqsa University at the Grand Mosque. And he put them both on television next to him and said, "We are Egyptians." This is a very, very powerful thing to do, because what he did, which is almost unheard of in the Middle East, is transcend sectoral differences.
Right.
And say, this is who we are. We are a healthy nation of Egyptians. And so this is, again, what we're trying to achieve throughout the Middle East, and yet we constantly poke Egypt in the eye because of, yes, considered problems, but we don't hold that hand of friendship very tightly. And my perspective is we need to be in authentic dialogue and friendship with this very strong ally who has held the peace with Israel at great sacrifice, who is in a transition period of stabilization. And by the way, 88% of the people in Egypt recently voted in the referendum to allow for the extension of the president's term. That's a very significant majority of people saying we need to choose security at this moment and stability in the institution of the presidency. So it's important that we do human rights and religious watch considerations and evaluations. It forces our friends to be attentive to these issues. But in terms of religious freedom and the protection of minority rights, there's a ways to go in Egypt. However, there are substantial protections in place. So the idea here is to affirm what is good and keep working toward what is better.
It's a very important country. You know, Egypt, the largest, 100 million people. They have the ability to influence a large portion of both Africa and the Middle East. So it's a very key ally. So you're absolutely correct. And I think the leadership, it's clear. I've been to Cairo. I was actually there for the opening of the cathedral, and was in fact talked to the president. briefly, President el-Sisi, at that opening. And I was amazed at how he is trying to use his influence to change the culture to allow for greater religious freedom. The challenge is, and this is what we found in our report, or stated in our report, is that while, in Cairo we see very positive things, when you get out to the rural portions of Egypt, there is major problems as it pertains to religious freedom, as there's anti-Christian mob violence in Upper Egypt. But there's certainly a country that we should be welcoming in and not pushing away. No question about it.
Yeah, you're correct to point out in Upper Egypt, particularly in the area of Minya, we have reports as well of violence against Christians, very real passivity on the part of government in terms of prosecuting those who are guilty of violence against Christians. I recently sent a letter to the Coptic bishop in the area to continue to give him encouragement. In fact, I raised this very point with the foreign minister, who was sitting in my office just a couple of weeks ago, in a chair which is right in front of me right now as I'm talking to you, along with several other key points of tension in the relationship. But the only reason that I can do that is because I'm trying to hold the hand of friendship even tighter. Mm-hmm. We have a very strong military-to-military relationship. As I said, Egypt has held the peace. They are fighting their brand of ISIS in the Sinai Desert. They've got problems along the Libyan border. They're going to great lengths to try to secure that border so terrorist influences don't come from there. They've got problems to the south with Sudan. They're actually entering into an energy agreement with the Israelis. No one knows about any of this stuff. Their robust relationship, security relationship with Israel is real, and yet we'll critique this and that, appropriately so. But in order to have legitimacy, we have to be in authentic dialogue and authentic friendship. And this has been my point of founding the Egyptian Caucus, of trying to leverage my experience as a younger person to try to elevate consciousness about the importance of this ally and to give them the encouragement and sometimes the necessary critique to make changes that are consistent with justice, human rights, human dignity, so their society can flourish even better.
You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. So glad to have you with us. Congressman Fortenberry, Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska, my guest, is discussing Egypt, an important ally emerging after a very turbulent time. The White House today confirming that the Trump administration moving toward designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Now, there have been some advocating for that for quite some time, including, and I'm sure this came up in your meetings with President Sisi, they would like to see the Muslim Brotherhood identified as a terrorist organization. What effect might this have on the stability in Egypt?
Well, it's my understanding that was a direct request of President Sisi to President Trump when they met here. I didn't have the chance this time to dialogue directly with President Sisi, although I was in a room with him in another format and presentation. There is an important set of distinctions here. The Muslim Brotherhood, yes, there's been conversation for a very long time about designating the Egyptian branch of Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organization, and obviously the administration has moved in that direction. There are other countries, though, that caution us about such moves, such as the country of Jordan, which has Muslim Brotherhood representatives in their own parliament, and so there's a different type of relationship there. So I think it's important to narrow this place to place rather than just think of it in terms of an umbrella designation.
Mm-hmm. Of course, they have a presence in many different countries, and you're right, different countries view it in a different way, although there is even some questionable view of them in Jordan. It's just they play kind of a different role.
Yes.
Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Jeff, great to talk with you again, and we'll encourage people to read your piece. We've got a link to it on our website.
Pleasure, Tony. Thank you.
All right, Jeff Fortenberry from Nebraska. You can go to TonyPerkins.com.